For the past 6 weeks, every single narrative surrounding the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie has fixated on one precise moment, 1:47 in the morning. The surveillance feed cuts to black, leaving only the chilling silhouette of an unidentified male lingering on the front porch. The widely accepted timeline presents 41 agonizing minutes spent roaming within the residence. Crimson stains left behind on the entryway stairs. A sudden, catastrophic loss of transmission from her cardiac device at exactly 2:28 in the morning, followed by a vehicle fleeing into the night at 2:36. This sequence of events has become the definitive public narrative, scrutinized endlessly by armchair detectives and mainstream outlets alike. Yet, despite this obsessive breakdown of the footage, law enforcement remains completely empty-handed. We must look elsewhere to uncover the truth. Our investigation winds the clock back 4 crucial hours to 9:50 in the evening on January 31st, pinpointing the exact moment a garage bay heavily sealed shut in the affluent enclave of the Catalina foothills. The sole individual capable of verifying what truly transpired behind that metal barrier is a man who has subsequently found federal agents knocking on his door on no less than 5 separate occasions. According to Tomaso Cioni, he personally chauffeured his elderly mother-in-law back to her residence following a family gathering hosted at his own property. His official statement claims he maintained visual contact as she stepped through the interior threshold. He insists the automatic barrier lowered securely in her wake, leaving him with the absolute certainty that she was safely locked inside. That remains his unverified version of events. The solitary piece of circumstantial evidence suggesting Nancy even made it back to her property is the mechanical lowering of that door precisely at 9:50 that evening. There is absolutely zero video footage documenting her crossing the threshold. Not a single resident in the surrounding vicinity witnessed this alleged vehicular drop-off. Every subsequent detail hinges entirely on the word of the final individual to report seeing her alive. Which brings us to a glaring psychological inconsistency regarding her strict pharmaceutical regimen. Nancy required a mandatory nighttime dosage. Crucial cardiovascular prescriptions were scheduled for consumption at roughly 10 o'clock at night. Given her supposed arrival window between 9:45 and 9:50, she possessed a mere 5 to 15 minutes to ingest those life-saving pills before the deadline. When investigators breached the home the following morning, those exact capsules remained perfectly undisturbed, resting silently on the kitchen island. We are expected to believe that an 84-year-old widow, reliant on an artificial pacemaker, and whom local authorities declared would succumb within 24 hours without her prescriptions, walked safely through her front door. Then, she supposedly bypassed the very spot where her lifeline awaited her, ignoring it entirely. Perhaps it slipped her mind a slight possibility, though highly contradictory for an individual explicitly categorized by the lead sheriff as possessing immense cognitive sharpness. Alternatively, one must assume she immediately retreated to her bedroom to sleep. While conceivable, this theory requires accepting that she abruptly abandoned a deeply ingrained health habit on the most critical night of her life. A far more sinister explanation is that an unforeseen entity intercepted her path before she ever laid eyes on those pills. Or, perhaps, she never even stepped foot inside the kitchen to begin with. The crime scene revealed her auditory enhancement devices had been removed, plunging her into total deafness, while her cellular device rested quietly beside her bed. Her financial belongings remained secured within the residence. Her personal vehicle sat parked in its designated bay. Every tangible item tying her to that physical space was undisturbed and perfectly aligned with her normal routine. Every single thing, except for the woman herself. For a month and a half, the online sleuthing community has maintained a relentless, almost blinding fixation on the identity of the shadowy intruder caught on camera. However, my investigation probes a distinctly darker, more terrifying inquiry. What horrors unfolded in the void between 9:50 in the evening and 1:47 the following morning? Those missing 4 hours remain shrouded in complete, chilling silence. They constitute a temporal black hole that law enforcement has notably refrained from dissecting in the public eye. Yet, once you analyze the glaring anomalies, both the disturbing discoveries and the conspicuous absences unearthed within Tomaso Cioni's impounded vehicle after it spent 40 days under forensic lock and key, and combine that with the remote Tucson Badlands, where tracking teams allegedly secured a discarded dark coat alongside women's trousers size 12, Couple those findings with the deeply unsettling links between Tomaso's underground musical circles and the extortionist who transmitted a ransom demand not to federal agents, not to her high-profile daughter, but straight to Tomaso's private cellular line. Suddenly, that unaccounted-for window of time no longer appears to be a mere lapse in the timeline. It emerges as the devastating key to the entire mystery. This deep-dive investigation ventures into the psychological shadows and overlooked anomalies that mainstream coverage has completely ignored. We are shifting the spotlight away from the entryway footage, ignoring the bizarre reversed footsteps, and looking past local law enforcement's conflicting statements. Instead, we are zeroing in on the chilling 4-hour prelude that set the stage for a nightmare. By the time we conclude, the narrative you thought you understood will be entirely dismantled, leaving behind a reality far more sinister than you ever anticipated. Like clockwork, Nancy removed her high-grade auditory implants each evening before retiring. These were exceptionally potent devices, and once they left her ears, she was plunged into absolute, impenetrable silence. At 84 years of age, her heart relied on a surgical implant that continuously transmitted vital biometric data to her integrated digital ecosystem while she lay unconscious. Managing a severe cardiovascular ailment required a rigorous schedule of prescription drugs upon waking and before dusk. Physically, she was a fragile target, tipping the scales at a mere 150 pounds. And yet, dusk after dusk, once the world faded into silence, she slumbered entirely isolated within an empty residence surrounded by the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Arizona wasteland. Independence had been forced upon her decades prior. Following the tragic demise of her spouse, Charles, during a 1988 Mexican excavation expedition, a then 46-year-old Nancy abruptly shouldered the immense burden of raising 3 youths single-handedly, stepping into both parental roles before dawn. Retired federal investigator Maureen O'Connell, a woman intimately familiar with such childhood grief, having lost her own father at the exact age, Savannah was characterized matriarchs of Nancy's generation as possessing a near-feral level of self-reliance. They represent a resilient breed that vehemently rejects the notion of surrendering their autonomy to an assisted living facility. These are the fiercely proud individuals determined to breathe their last breath within the walls of their own property, completely defiant of outside opinions. Nancy epitomized this exact psychological archetype. While perfectly capable of operating a motor vehicle beneath the stars, she actively avoided doing so. The true deterrent was the psychological dread of pulling up to an unlit, profoundly vacant structure in the dead of night. Sunlight brought her comfort, yet the creeping dusk forced her to depend on relatives or rideshare services for transit. Consequently, every hired commute placed her fate in the hands of an unknown driver who was suddenly granted the intimate knowledge of where she slept. These transient strangers learned she was in her twilight years, that she was dropped off in the shadows without an escort, and that the isolated desert property utilized a surveillance lens that captured absolutely nothing. She was enveloped by high-status offspring. Her daughter pulls in an annual salary of $8 million within the Manhattan elite, while her son Cameron boasts a decorated past as a military colonel piloting F-16 fighter jets. Another daughter, Annie, resided a mere 4 miles down the road alongside her spouse, Tommaso. Clearly, the matriarch was surrounded by a robust familial network. Despite this proximity to wealth and capable loved ones, her daily reality was chillingly vulnerable. 0 on-site assistance and absolutely no wearable emergency transmitters. There were no distress triggers wired into the walls, and the solitary security system positioned at the entryway suffered from a lapsed data plan. It possessed the capability to flag movement, yet failed entirely to archive those crucial moments to an external drive. From a tactical standpoint, the device was nothing more than a plastic ornament. Anyone intimately familiar with the inner workings of her daily life was fully aware of this glaring blind spot. As dusk settled on January 31st, the matriarch summoned a digital taxi to transport her to her daughter and son-in-law's residence. Local sheriff logs officially clock her arrival at precisely 5:32 in the evening. The ensuing hours reportedly consisted of a shared meal, casual entertainment, and a tequila cocktail. In a haunting piece of foreshadowing, her high-profile daughter had once publicly chided her on national broadcasts to avoid consuming full beverages of that nature. Owing to her incredibly diminutive physical stature, it began as an entirely unremarkable Friday evening. Right around 9:48 p.m., Tomaso chauffeured her back to her residence, a brief commute lasting roughly 10 minutes. By 9:50 p.m., the heavy garage door had sealed shut. According to Tomaso's account, he visually verified she was safely indoors before turning his vehicle around and retreating to his own property. A mere 4 miles separated them. Yet, over the span of the ensuing 14 hours, complete silence fell over Nancy's world. Not a single phone call rang out. Not a solitary text message was sent. No one bothered to make that 4-mile trip to check on an 84-year-old woman relying on a pacemaker, a vulnerable widow who routinely removed her hearing aids at night, leaving her utterly deaf inside a dark home where the surveillance system had suspiciously stopped capturing footage. When the authorities were finally alerted to her disappearance, it was not driven by sudden panic or an instinctual fear for her safety. The alarm was only raised because she failed to arrive at a companion's residence the following afternoon for their scheduled viewing of a local church's broadcasted service. Relatives finally arrived to investigate just around 11 a.m. They combed through the silent rooms. They scoured the surrounding grounds. She had vanished without a trace. It was midday when they dialed 911. Tragically, by that point, whatever dark fate had befallen, Nancy Guthrie had already been sealed for a minimum of 9 agonizing hours. We must now delve deep into the chilling narrative painted by the forensic reality within those walls. This is vastly different from the sanitized statements fed to the public by the local sheriff's department. It strays far from the superficial summaries that have been endlessly recycled across every major news network for the past 6 weeks. We are looking at the raw, unfiltered truth, what the scene reveals, the glaring omissions, and the terrifying mysteries left unanswered. The nightmare officially commenced at 1:47 a.m., the exact moment the Nest doorbell was manually neutralized. An unknown intruder physically tampered with the device. Fortunately, federal investigators, collaborating closely with Google technicians, managed to extract ghostly, residual frames. These spectral images and fragmented video clips were never meant to see the light of day, primarily because the system was deliberately prevented from uploading its data to the cloud network. The salvaged media displays a shadowy silhouette lurking on the front patio, navigating the darkness with the eerie confidence of an actual resident. The prowler was neither hunting nor hesitating. Instead, the phantom marched straight toward the lens, exhibiting a fluid muscle memory that is exclusively born from intense, calculated repetition. Experts in behavioral science labeled this terrifyingly calm demeanor as ownership behavior. The suspect practically mocks the device, lightly striking the glass twice before plunging the feed into darkness. It was a chillingly casual gesture, akin to mindlessly flicking off a bedroom light. This intruder was clad in dark nitrile gloves and a heavy balaclava, though a hint of facial hair betrayed the disguise. Whether a mustache or a goatee, it was partially obscured above a 25-liter Ozark Trail rucksack, a common Walmart purchase distinguished by its luminous safety bands. He sported a concealed belly rig, carrying a weapon secured in an awkward, non-standard orientation. Furthermore, a strange bulge protruded from his trousers, perhaps a radio antenna, an object far too unusually shaped to be a standard mobile device. Federal agents cataloged the phantom assailant as a male, standing somewhere between 5'9" and 5'10", possessing an unremarkable medium physique. Seasoned criminal behavioral analyst Jim Clemente managed to spot what looked like a dark tattoo or a distinctive scar on the attacker's right wrist, briefly exposed when the synthetic fabric slipped during a swift motion. The events that transpired over the subsequent 41 minutes remain shrouded in official secrecy. With the electronic eyes blinded, our entire understanding is reconstructed solely from the grim remnants left in the wake of the intrusion. Crimson stains marred the entryway, trailing ominously down the concrete driveway. These were perfectly circular drops, their spherical shapes entirely undisturbed. According to the expert analysis of former federal operative O'Connell, this specific spatter geometry dictates that the fluid plummeted at a perfect perpendicular angle from a fixed elevation. This grim detail suggests the victim was being hauled through the air, completely incapable of bearing her own weight. There were absolutely no disruptions in the crimson trail to indicate that shoes had trampled through the fresh fluid. Not a single chaotic smear or sinister drag pattern marred the pathway. O'Connell deduces a terrifying sequence. The elderly woman was bundled into some sort of casing, transported over the threshold of her heavy oak entryway, hauled beyond the formidable wrought iron fencing, and deposited into a waiting transport. Nancy tipped the scales at exactly 150 pounds, While a lone individual possessed the physical capacity to execute this lift, it would have been a grueling and agonizingly slow endeavor. Back inside, her life-saving prescriptions rested undisturbed on the marble island. The daylight pills and the twilight capsules were entirely neglected. Her cellular device remained abandoned on her bedside table alongside her untouched billfold. The home was not plundered. The intruder stole absolutely nothing of material value, only the woman herself. At precisely 2:28 a.m., the digital tether linking her cardiac implant to the bedside transmitter violently severed. That abrupt disconnection marked the final digital heartbeat Nancy Guthrie ever transmitted to the modern world. Exactly 41 minutes elapsed between the blinding of the doorbell lens and the silencing of her heart monitor. This represents 41 agonizing minutes where an interloper occupied her sanctuary without a shred of haste, operating free from the erratic adrenaline of a panicked burglar. This was an invader who glided through the corridors with the intimate familiarity of a homeowner navigating the pitch-black hours of 2 in the morning, intrinsically aware of which floorboards betrayed a squeak and which offered a silent passage. Yet, the nightmare that culminated on the 1st of February did not organically birth itself that evening. Our timeline must pull back to the 23rd of January, exactly 9 sunrises prior to the kidnapping. A deeply unsettling piece of footage surfaced on a local neighborhood watch application. It depicted a solitary male figure trekking in reverse up an ascending concrete path nestled deep within the Catalina foothills. This strange occurrence took place a mere 6.5 miles from Nancy's peaceful estate. The man was not intoxicated, nor was he losing his balance. He marched backward with a chilling, calculated precision, keeping his spine rigidly angled toward the lens while burying his face into his chest. Off-the-shelf home surveillance systems are not engineered to capture perpetual, unbroken streams of reality. Instead, these devices depend on passive thermal technology to recognize sudden spikes in ambient temperature and physical displacement. The moment a human breaks the digital threshold, the thermal trigger jolts the internal processor awake, forcing the optics to focus, while the wireless connection frantically establishes a link to the cloud. This entire mechanical awakening consumes roughly 1 to 2 precious seconds. If you approach normally, the lens will inevitably seize your facial features during that brief activation window. However, if you retreat toward the door in reverse, the system records nothing more than the featureless fabric of a hooded sweatshirt. Once the electronic eye is fully functional and recording, your identity is already completely protected from its gaze. This phantom figure was deliberately manipulating a highly technical blind spot embedded within civilian-grade security networks, utilizing only his physical posture to defeat the software. This was no spontaneous act of burglary. This was the result of meticulous, calculated research. The property he selected for this bizarre test run was similarly positioned in the remote Catalina foothills. It boasted the identical desolate desert architecture, the same sprawling, isolated driveways, and fell under the exact same municipal dark sky regulations. It was an environment starved of municipal illumination, cloaked in profound shadows just 6.5 miles away from his ultimate target. It provided a geographic buffer, massive enough to prevent detectives from drawing a line between the two locations if his practice run was interrupted. Yet, it was geographically similar enough to flawlessly mirror the atmospheric conditions of the victim's domain. The predator was not wandering. He was executing a flawless, terrifying dry run. A barking dog sparked his flight, yet he maintained a rigid backward stance, deliberately burying the innate reflex to face the noise. He preferred risking a blind fall over surrendering a single identifiable facial frame. Such chilling discipline demands exhaustive rehearsal. This predator mentally replayed the scenario until cold execution utterly eradicated natural instinct. His knapsack mirrored the 25-liter Ozark Trail model spotted at Nancy's residence 9 days later, boasting highly distinctive reflective safety strips. Identical bag, entirely different location. Comparing both sightings reveals a psychological shift. On January 23rd, the prowler appears terrified, hunched, and intensely paranoid. By February 1st, he strides onto Nancy's porch with unsettling calm, audaciously tapping the camera twice. His surveillance fear vanished entirely because authorities never knocked on his door afterward. He learned a deeply dangerous lesson. He was virtually invisible. Going into February 1st, testing was over. He was executing. The sheriff quietly flagged January 11th, 21 days prior to the vanishing, requesting nearby surveillance footage spanning 9 p.m. to midnight. He never explained why. 3 dates spanning 3 weeks, January 11th, 23rd, and February 1st. Observation, rehearsal, execution. 4 major media giants quickly engaged: ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN. Operating independently, these networks verified through confidential police contacts that the stalker scouted Nancy's actual property multiple times before she vanished. One FBI photograph shows him without a pack. The surveillance footage reveals one: identical clothing, different gear loadouts, proving 2 distinct visits. The Pima County Sheriff's Department dismissed these reports as entirely speculative. 4 national networks and independent insiders, standing against a completely isolated local sheriff. Now, observe the neighboring security footage, because here the intruder's sophistication becomes undeniable. On March 6th, federal agents canvassed Nancy's neighborhood, asking one highly specific question door to door. Did anyone suffer bizarre internet blackouts on February 1st? Multiple residents confirmed they had. One neighbor, living close enough to clearly view Nancy's property, reported something stranger. His Ring system's history was wiped out that evening. However, it wasn't a total failure. Only lenses aimed directly at Nancy's home went dark. Devices guarding the opposite side of his residence using the identical router, network, and power kept recording normally. That is no random broadband outage. What occurred was a highly targeted electronic disruption, intentionally aimed at specific devices directionally. Mentioning a Wi-Fi jammer conjures images of crude devices obliterating all signals. Yet, Nancy's Nest camera successfully captured brief footage before being disabled. Her pacemaker maintained connection until exactly 2:28 a.m. A brute force jammer severs both instantly, an assessment corroborated by retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffendorfer. Therefore, whatever caused the localized blackout was not a full-spectrum jammer. Evidence points toward a third, insidious technology, a covert deauthentication tool. This gadget covertly transmits manipulative commands within standard Wi-Fi protocols, tricking targeted devices into disconnecting. The attack method is surgically directional. It selectively blinds surveillance on one home's flank, while leaving the opposite side completely untouched. Terrifyingly, this hardware costs under $30 and fits in a pocket, perfectly explaining the digital anomalies the neighbors detailed. That same neighbor, whose side-facing cameras mysteriously flatlined, reported their dog abruptly waking them at that exact midnight hour. The animal's frantic state was highly uncharacteristic. Once outside, the dog simply stood frozen, staring intently directly toward Nancy's property with raised ears. Eric Maldonado, a 29-year Pima County veteran, emphasized that canines detect high-pitch frequencies imperceptible to humans. The dog clearly reacted to something real the exact second those cameras failed. Sprawling directly behind Nancy's residence is open desert. That vigilant neighbor lives along that identical patch of wilderness. If the suspect approached via the rugged desert rear, intentionally avoiding the illuminated suburban street where parked vehicles draw attention, he inevitably crept close enough to that adjacent fence line for a pocketed device to silently kill those specific cameras as he passed. Aerial drone footage subsequently obtained by Fox News revealed smashed security floodlights behind Nancy's secluded home. Front camera manually blinded. Rear illumination deliberately shattered 2 entirely distinct points of entry preparation. While one person could do both, executing them simultaneously in the dead of night is what retired Las Vegas Lieutenant Randy Sutton identified as a glaring indicator of multiple suspects. 8 agonizing minutes after Nancy's pacemaker disconnected, a distant traffic camera down Camino Real caught a fleeting glimpse of a vehicle slipping past at 2:36 a.m. NBC correspondent Liz Kreutz drove from Nancy's house to that camera, 6 minutes flat. Pacemaker disconnected at 2:28. 6 minutes driving. Car appears at 2:36, a 2-minute margin of error. It is precisely the kind of brief, calculated pause a driver takes at a dark street's end, frantically checking mirrors before vanishing down a desolate back road. Even the skeptical local sheriff publicly conceded the timing matched perfectly. That critical camera belonged to a private couple residing outside the official search perimeter. Consequently, law enforcement never bothered requesting their footage. The couple scrubbed the footage themselves and voluntarily brought it to authorities. That is the core crime. Now, let me expose the intricate web surrounding it, because this magnitude of tragedy never happens in a simple vacuum. It thrives within a shadowed network of volatile people, twisted personal relationships, and documented associations, all looping right back to one inescapable origin point. Tomaso Cioni has been a shadowy fixture, lurking within Tucson's underground music scene for nearly 2 decades. His obscure band, Early Black, performs moody post-punk and shoegaze at local dive bars. In 2007, he met drummer Dominic Evans through a simple classified ad. Their musical partnership remained unbroken from that moment forward. Their premiere record, Life, Love, Murder. The duo haunted various Tucson stages, notably the Flycatcher, a beautifully dilapidated dive anchored deep within the city's subterranean music culture. The narrative shifted darkly in February 2026, when law enforcement handcuffed Derek Colella. His alleged offense? Firing a chilling text directly to Tommaso and Annie's shared device. "Did you secure the Bitcoin? We are standing by for the transfer." A brief, shadowy phone call followed. Investigators eventually dismissed the bizarre interaction as a sadistic prank, entirely unrelated to the actual abduction. Despite being formally charged with opportunistic extortion, a glaring detail remained. This suspect had not simply dialed a random combination of digits to locate Tommaso. Operating beneath the visceral stage moniker, Secret Mutilator, Colella was deeply embedded in the exact same Tucson alternative circuit Tommaso had frequented for years. Paper trails bind him directly to local subculture figures, individuals sharing the exact same dive bars, gatherings, and events surrounding the Early Black's immediate ecosystem. Within a sprawling desert town like Tucson, the underground circuit maxes out at perhaps 200 or 300 souls. In such claustrophobic parameters, these intersections are intensely intimate. The shadowy figure demanding cryptocurrency for a human life was not some faceless scammer operating thousands of miles away. He was a ghost walking those identical dimly lit corridors, positioned closely enough to possess Tommaso's private contact information. Naturally, proximity alone does not prove Colella orchestrated the abduction. Detectives classified the extortion as a cruel ruse. Yet this revelation leaves a lingering, deeply unsettling mystery, completely unaddressed. How many individuals lingering within Tommaso's social orbit possessed intimate intelligence regarding Nancy? Who else knew her precise address, daily routines, physical vulnerabilities, or the identity of her high-profile daughter? Within an insular creative clique, where anonymity is impossible, where musicians share cramped stages and alcohol-fueled confessions, sensitive details bleed into the ether without a single question being asked. Whispers echo. You subconsciously catalog the private realities of those standing right beside you at the bar. And if a prominent member of that web happens to be married to the daughter of an 84-year-old matriarch dwelling in absolute solitude within the desolate Catalina foothills, protected only by dead surveillance equipment and a perimeter gate prone to failure, that highly specific intelligence becomes a terrifyingly valuable commodity to a predator. This brings the focus back to the vehicle. It represents the crucial nexus where tangible forensic data violently collides with the established timeline. Detectives confiscated Tommaso and Annie's blue Honda CR-V during the initial, frantic hours. By March 11th, a grueling 40 days had passed, and the automobile remained firmly in police custody. The stripped-down chassis sits in a local garage, being painstakingly reassembled following what seasoned investigative journalist Dave Mack characterized as a brutally thorough forensic teardown. The Pima County Sheriff's Department issued a statement to Parade magazine claiming they are preparing to release the vehicle, though they conveniently provided no concrete timeline. 40 agonizing days. An automobile owned by individuals the sheriff supposedly absolved of suspicion remains buried in an evidence bay, relentlessly processed and unreturned. Former federal investigator Jennifer Coffindaffer publicly speculated on the profound tactical significance of this specific piece of machinery. Did a shadow tail Nancy as she departed Annie and Tommaso's residence the night of January 31st? Could a clandestine GPS monitor have been planted on the undercarriage? Did an unknown assailant physically breach the cabin, unwittingly leaving behind microscopic traces of genetic material or latent prints? That metal box represents the final, secured, isolated environment Nancy breathed in prior to stepping across the threshold of her doomed sanctuary. Every microscopic remnant she deposited within that interior, stray hairs, sloughed skin cells, or synthetic threads, is actively being cross-referenced against the sinister debris field recovered from her invaded living room and patio. Should an anomalous genetic profile materialize amidst the floor mats, law enforcement instantly gains an unbreakable forensic bridge connecting a phantom suspect to Nancy's final surviving journey. Coffin Daffer also highlighted a fascinating judicial nuance that complicates the narrative from every conceivable angle. She noted every law enforcement sweep of Annie and Tommaso's estate was executed strictly through voluntary permission, rather than forced via probable cause warrants. In her professional estimation, authorities simply lack the empirical weight to legally target the couple. Yet, the psychology of compliance carries a dual meaning. It signifies Annie and Tommaso willingly permitted detectives to tear their primary transportation apart, voluntarily opening their doors for a series of highly intrusive tactical sweeps. It reveals a willingness to watch police strip security equipment from walls, dredge the subterranean septic system, and haul out luggage in the dead of night while technicians systematically documented every square inch for hours. Individuals harboring no dark secrets assist police without hesitation. Conversely, predators possessing absolute certainty their forensic trail is scrubbed clean will exhibit the exact same boundless cooperation. Mere compliance does not automatically equate to innocence. It is a calculated psychological posture shared equally by the falsely accused and the meticulously prepared. Furthermore, Annie's personal automobile was abruptly towed from her private garage. Currently, authorities maintain an impenetrable silence regarding what, if anything, was discovered inside. This dark trail inevitably winds into the unforgiving desert as an unexpected discovery emerged. Unaffiliated civilian trackers combing the rugged wilderness surrounding the city allegedly unearthed discarded apparel while hunting for Nancy's remains. Specifically, size 12 women's trousers and a dark outer coat. These abandoned garments were dragged from the arid landscape, with eerie images quickly rippling across digital networks. To date, the official investigative body adamantly refuses to verify whether these weathered textiles hold any legitimate ties to the ongoing abduction puzzle. This eerie fragment must be viewed purely as a developing anomaly rather than a verified artifact, yet its mere existence casts a long, unsettling shadow. In an investigation centered on a frail woman violently ripped from her bed at the witching hour and subsequently swallowed by the darkness, abandoned garments festering under the desert sun right inside the designated hunting grid represent a terrifying variable demanding immediate, microscopic scrutiny. Enter Eric Maldonado, a seasoned veteran who formerly wore the badge as a Pima County deputy. This is a man who spent 29 grueling years hunting thieves and phantoms through these exact, sun-baked residential corridors. Local lore dictates that if you want someone to disappear out here, the wasteland provides. Victims are reduced to ash in clandestine fire pits or swallowed by the earth in desolate stretches, doomed to remain unfound unless the killer draws you a map. He described the unforgiving expanse of the Sonoran Badlands as infinite an ocean of sand and scrub where hunting for a shallow grave is a hopeless, impossible endeavor. Yet, behavioral profilers and historical kidnapping metrics point to a chilling probability. Her remains are likely concealed within a tight 2 to 5 mile radius of her own front door. Let us strip away the noise. Forget the wild online speculation, the keyboard sleuths, and the endless forum rabbit holes. We are going to examine only the cold, hard scenarios surrounding this mysterious disappearance, weighing the physical evidence, anchoring each possibility against the critical flaws that tear them apart. The primary hypothesis, the one that investigators simply cannot shake, centers on an inside job. At the heart of this dark web sits Tomaso Cioni, the final individual to look upon her while she was still drawing breath. Their evening concluded with him navigating her vehicle back to her residence, exchanging pleasantries by the garage doors, before making the brief 4-mile commute to the home he cohabitates with Annie. For the crucial window spanning from 10 o'clock at night until 1:47 the following morning, a verifiable, third-party alibi simply does not exist. Because Annie shared the residence that night, any timeline offered by one is conveniently corroborated by the other. Furthermore, he possesses 2 decades worth of intimate, familial intelligence. He was deeply familiar with the property's surveillance network. It was not merely about knowing the camera placements, but harboring the critical secret that they were essentially dummy lenses, capturing no footage, a fact he would have gleaned from watching her manipulate the Nest interface countless times over the years. He possessed the knowledge that her cloud storage subscription had lapsed, Then there is the matter of the perimeter entrance. He stood at that exact gateway, a mere 4 hours prior to someone bypassing it with zero signs of forced entry. Consider her profound vulnerability. He was well aware of her nightly routine of removing her auditory devices, plunging her into complete silence after the clock struck 10. Her pharmaceutical regimen was no mystery to him either. He understood that her crucial nighttime dosage was scheduled to be ingested mere moments after he departed the driveway. When it comes to the architectural footprint, 20 years of routine Friday gatherings had mapped the estate in his mind so perfectly that he could likely glide through the pitch-black corridors without so much as brushing against a doorframe. Professionally, this is a man who instructs advanced placement biological sciences, university-tier genetic studies, and, chillingly, the fundamental principles of forensic investigation. In his classroom, pupils are trained in polymerase chain reaction amplification and gel electrophoresis, the exact scientific methodologies utilized by criminal laboratories to isolate and trace genetic material left at murder scenes. Slipping on nitrile protective wear is a daily occupational habit. He possesses an intimate, terrifyingly thorough understanding of how human biology transfers, the precise conditions that cause it to break down, and the exact protocols evidence teams use to harvest it. Yet, his expertise also dictates that synthetic barriers are flawed. He understands that violent, physical exertion generates microscopic ruptures in the material, and that biological trace sweat accumulates against the skin in a matter of minutes. A mastermind steeped in biological science would recognize the absolute necessity of shedding those contaminated barriers instantly upon fleeing, never abandoning them on the property, but discarding them miles into the abyss. Shift your focus to the perpetrator's tactical ensemble. For a month and a half, amateur online sleuths have fiercely argued that a budget-friendly rucksack and an improperly fitted firearm holster point toward a bumbling novice. We are not going to retread those tired debates. The far more compelling psychological angle is what this specific collection of equipment reveals about the mind and the digital footprint of the buyer. That specific Ozark Trail satchel is a proprietary item sold strictly at Walmart locations. Attached to it is a unique stock-keeping unit identifier. That singular code generates an indelible paper trail. If plastic was swiped, or even if a smartphone pinged a local Tucson big box store's network during the month of January, that electronic ghost is currently sleeping inside a corporate server. This ominous disguise is far more than a theatrical costume designed to obscure identity. It is, fundamentally, a lingering ledger of guilt. Furthermore, federal agents have possessed a 6-week head start to extract that very data. The chronological alignment of this crime is perhaps its most sinister element. The abduction was executed precisely during the 48 hours, when a high-profile family member was slated to fly across the globe to cover the Winter Games for a major broadcast network. These elite media deployments are set in stone half a year prior. If a predator intended to strike at the matriarch while her most influential, resourceful relative was stranded hemispheres away, temporarily swallowed by time zones and utterly powerless to ignite a rapid crisis response, that specific weekend was the ultimate tactical window. A random drifter hunting for a quick score would have zero insight into a television anchor's complex international itinerary. That breed of highly sensitive, logistical intelligence is passed around the intimacy of the Sunday dinner table. In the spring of 2025, a calculated 8 months preceding the abduction, Tomaso quietly executed a durable power of attorney document, transferring complete legal dominion over his assets and real estate directly to Annie. Veteran broadcast reporter Ashley Banfield brought a devastating revelation to the public eye, citing a deeply embedded law enforcement contact who indicated that investigators were staring straight at Tomaso as their primary target. Naturally, the county sheriff immediately stepped in front of the microphones to issue a flat, calculated denial. Yet the actions of the federal bureau told an entirely different story. Agents descended upon the couple's property on at least 5 separate occasions, hauling away potential evidence in sealed paper sacks and thoroughly plunging the depths of their subterranean septic system. Forensics practically dismantled his vehicle down to the chassis. Through all of this mounting pressure, while the rest of the grieving family pleaded with the press, Tomaso maintained a chilling, absolute radio silence. He was a phantom. The silence broke on the 2nd of March, when he finally emerged at a public vigil. Almost instantly, thousands of digital eyes began overlaying his distinct, halting gait with the haunting security footage of the masked intruder approaching the door. Observers scrutinized his stature as he stood next to his relative, who measures an even 5 feet 10 inches. In every captured photograph, he never towered over her frame. They were perfectly level. Strangely, his official medical measurements have remained closely guarded from public record. The very physical discrepancy that was originally presented as his airtight defense might now be the thread that unravels it. This dark realization spirals directly into the second prevailing hypothesis. Enter the musical collaborator, Dominic Evans. He boasts a solid 5'9" frame, complete with the exact arrangement of facial hair detailed in the federal wanted posters. A distinct blemish scarring his right forearm perfectly mirrors an anomaly spotted by behavioral analysts in the grainy entrance footage. Adding to the gravity, he carries a heavy jacket of felony convictions within the local jurisdiction. His rap sheet reads like a manual for this exact crime: breaking and entering, strong-arm robbery, grand larceny, and corporate theft. For 19 years, he shared a stage with Tommaso, a bond forged from a simple newspaper listing that evolved over thousands of grueling hours locked inside recording studios and rehearsal spaces. If we assume the insider acted as the invisible architect, drafting the sinister blueprint from afar, then his old bandmate represents the quintessential mercenary engineered to execute it. He is the terrifying phantom captured on the doorstep, a hardened individual possessing the specific, ruthless street experience required to breach a fortified residence and overpower a defenseless victim. The Federal Bureau's meticulously crafted physical profile aligns with his appearance with deeply unsettling precision. While his extensive history of violent property crimes proves he possessed the cold capability to pull the trigger on such an operation, his 19-year brotherhood with the primary person of interest supplied the ultimate currency required for conspiracy: unshakable trust. This mastermind and muscle dynamic operates on a devastatingly simple premise. The insider funnels the vital intelligence out of the inner circle, mapping the dark corridors, detailing the blind spots in the surveillance, tracking the victim's rigid routines, and isolating every single fatal vulnerability. The architect of the crime never actually sets foot on the property. Their true currency is intelligence, operating entirely from the shadows of their own home. By simply avoiding the vicinity of the crime, they effortlessly manufacture an airtight alibi. Then comes the muscle, the individual possessing both the sheer audacity to breach a residence at exactly 1:47 in the morning and the cold-blooded composure to execute a high-stress operation based on intelligence gathered weeks in advance. This operative crosses the threshold equipped with intimate details they could never have obtained independently. Exactly which surveillance lenses are actively recording, which ones are mere decoys, which access point remains unsecured. Furthermore, they know the precise layout of the interior, right down to the specific prescriptions resting on the bathroom vanity. Working in tandem, a duo would perfectly partition the physical labor. While one physically subdues Nancy, their partner secures the perimeter and carefully navigates her down the corridor. As one keeps a vigilant eye on the dark road outside, the other transports her into the waiting transport, seamlessly transitioning into the role of the getaway driver. That grueling 41-minute window, a highly volatile time frame for a lone wolf, transforms into a chillingly systematic procedure when split between two perpetrators. Interestingly, Evans claimed to the New York Times that his sole encounter with Nancy occurred way back in 2011. He maintained that authorities questioned him for a mere 40 minutes before dropping off the radar entirely, yet the local sheriff notably stopped short of officially exonerating him. Law enforcement publicly cleared the immediate relatives, but Evans does not belong to that inner circle. Rather, he remains a musical collaborator whom the lead investigator conveniently omitted from public briefings. Profiler O'Connell highlighted a deeply unsettling detail. The figure captured on the veranda exhibited absolute calm, entirely devoid of the subtle facial twitches or nervous tells typical of a high-stakes crime. She noted his demeanor suggested he had chemically taken the edge off beforehand. This eerie tranquility perfectly aligns with the profile of a hired gun, merely carrying out another person's master scheme. He carried none of the psychological burden of orchestrating the abduction, because the mastermind was safely tucked away 4 miles across town. A third, incredibly compelling hypothesis zeroes in on the vital conduit connecting the remote mastermind to the unsuspecting victim. Annie Guthrie occupies the role of Nancy's oldest child and was undeniably present at the family meal on January 31st, though narratives fatally diverge over whether she or Tommaso actually chauffeured her mother back to the residence. Whispers divide the blame, some pointing to Tommaso, others to Annie, and while the official word from the sheriff names Tommaso as the driver, contradictory testimonies stubbornly persist. Sharing a roof with Tommaso allows her to serve as his primary alibi, yet her own vehicle spent 40 days impounded by authorities, slowly being pieced back together following a grueling forensic teardown. Investigators repeatedly descended upon her residence, even executing a highly disruptive midnight raid to scour the premises. Detectives pored over the interior for hours on end, documenting every inch through crime scene photography, seizing luggage, and confiscating all personal surveillance equipment. They went so far as to probe the underground septic system, searching for anything that might prove Annie served as the fatal link between Tommaso and her own mother. Any granular intelligence Tommaso possessed regarding Nancy's private world, the blind spots of the security network, her daily pharmaceutical regime, her auditory devices, the courtyard entrance, and her nightly habits would have logically flowed through one source. The critical realization that the elderly woman would remain entirely undisturbed until midday was a secret born from Annie's intimate knowledge of her mother's life, as she knew every crevice of that property. She understood the daily rhythms intimately, fully aware that on the evening of January 31st, Nancy would cross the threshold into a dead quiet home, remove her only connection to sound, and vanish into a 14-hour window of total isolation. Notably, she and Tommaso jointly executed legal power of attorney documents back in May of 2025, securing control over essential familial assets. A chilling detail emerges from Savannah's 2024 autobiography, where she recounts a bizarre, theatrical pastime she shared with Annie and a cousin during their youth, pretending to abduct each other. This morbid role-play involved midnight awakenings, forced road trips stretching from Tucson all the way to Phoenix, and placing staged ransom calls to Nancy from anonymous public booths. It was a fully formed psychological blueprint buried deep within the family's past, ironically broadcast to the world through a highly successful literary release. Former agent Coffindaffer observed a crucial legal distinction. Every single search conducted at Annie and Tommaso's residence was permitted voluntarily, rather than forced through a judge's probable cause decree. According to her analysis, this indicates law enforcement lacks the concrete evidence needed to officially label them suspects, though she simultaneously floated the terrifying prospect that Nancy was electronically shadowed the moment she left Annie's driveway. This theory suggests a covert GPS transponder was discreetly affixed to the undercarriage of the transport car. It paints a picture of a predator lurking in the shadows of her property, perfectly anticipating her precise arrival time and fully grasping the depth of her defenselessness the moment she stepped out of the vehicle. A fourth narrative directs attention away from the inner circle but stops short of a random attacker. During an interview on Brian Enton's audio program, retired federal profilers Jim Clemente and Maureen O'Connell argued fiercely that the sinister angle of elder exploitation cannot be ignored. Clemente emphasized that investigators must scrutinize literally anyone who intersected with Nancy's orbit, no matter how brief or professional the interaction may have been. This casts a wide net over aquatic maintenance crews, groundskeepers, handymen, and the constant stream of parcel couriers. It also includes rideshare operators, essentially any temporary visitor who crossed the threshold and realized they were dealing with an aging, isolated, and highly susceptible target. Taking this thread even further, forensic expert Joseph Scott Morgan pointed out that the senior exploitation cases he has personally investigated almost always adhere to a very specific predatory rhythm. These are calculating predators who specifically hunt older demographics purely because they smell accumulated wealth. He hypothesized that Nancy's ransom value skyrocketed if the perpetrator understood exactly who her high-profile daughter was, a piece of local trivia that hardly requires extensive espionage to uncover in a city like Tucson. Because she depended heavily on late-night rideshares, every single trip exposed her to a new stranger who unwittingly absorbed her home coordinates, her advanced age, her nocturnal schedule, and the chilling reality that she routinely unlocked a pitch-black, empty home. O'Connell elaborated on the tragic psychological profile of aging victims, noting they often display a fatal level of misplaced trust in outsiders. She even recalled a neighbor in Nancy's exact demographic who casually allowed an unknown passerby indoors just to use the bathroom facility. However, this specific outsider hypothesis eventually hits a wall. Spending a full 41 minutes creeping through a residence goes far beyond the quick, surface-level knowledge of a service worker. It screams of a deeply ingrained, intimate familiarity with the space. That infamous, methodical tap on the surveillance lens delivered with such relaxed nonchalance simply doesn't fit the profile of a pool technician who only stopped by on occasion. That subtle movement belongs to someone who has stood on that exact veranda hundreds of times before, while the staggering $6 million extortion request demands a forensic understanding of Savannah's private wealth details far beyond the scope of a casual gardener. Ultimately, the fifth and perhaps most chilling hypothesis strips away all the complexity, originating directly from the one individual who understands the dark underbelly of these local streets better than anyone else alive. For nearly 3 decades, Eric Maldonado has worn the badge of the Pima County Sheriff's Office, navigating the darkest corners of human nature. His assessment of the grim fate that befell the victim centers on a home invasion that spiraled violently out of control. The predator methodically chose her residence, fully aware they were stalking a vulnerable, sleeping woman in the dead of night. Darkness was their only cover in a community far too dense for a brazen daytime intrusion. But the careful blueprint shattered the moment the elderly resident abruptly opened her eyes. A brutal struggle ensued, leaving crimson stains smeared across the front steps as the intruder's entire agenda drastically pivoted. Yet, it is the veteran detective's chilling insight regarding the victim's physical form that truly haunts the mind. Maldonado observes that the missing woman herself represents the ultimate evidentiary vault. Beneath her torn fingernails, woven into her garments, and transferred onto her bare flesh, lies the microscopic biological signature of her attacker. In the modern era of forensic science, any seasoned predator understands that genetic material is the unbreakable chain linking them to the atrocity. Leaving such damning proof at the residence was simply not an option. Thus, the assailant dragged her into the unforgiving expanse of the barren wasteland, ensuring her final resting place remained a tightly guarded secret. Those crucial pills were never abandoned as part of some brilliant diversionary tactic. They sat untouched simply because the sudden, violent clash forced a frantic deviation from the original blueprint. Preserving her life was never on the agenda. The sole objective morphed into pure self-preservation. However, this particular hypothesis suffers from the most glaring logical fractures of the entire investigation. Consider the chillingly patient reconnaissance missions meticulously carried out over a 3-week span, specifically noted on the 11th and 23rd of January. Ordinary thieves simply do not conduct brazen, pre-strike walkthroughs on a target's front steps just moments before executing their raid. Deploying advanced jamming hardware to precisely blind selected security lenses on targeted angles of particular properties represents a level of technical sophistication the seasoned detective has never witnessed in his Cumbrass's 29-year career. A 41-minute window utterly defies the rapid smash-and-grab rhythm of standard break-ins. Furthermore, the extortion messages, even if attributed to mere scavengers, materialized with such startling speed and intimate detail that they cannot be easily dismissed as mere coincidences. 5 distinct narratives have emerged from the shadows, every single one anchored by a solid foundation of verified, tangible clues. While glaring inconsistencies plague them all, a distinct psychological thread binds the initial triad of hypotheses, starkly isolating them from the remaining pair. The intimate circle narratives focusing on Tomaso, Evans, and Annie perfectly account for the missing 4-hour void. They logically resolve the mystery of the neglected, life-saving prescriptions. These internal angles rationalize the sudden, deliberate blindness of the surveillance network, just as they clarify how the perimeter fencing remained completely unbreached. They provide a chilling justification for the agonizing 14-hour stretch, where the victim was left entirely unchecked, and they illuminate how the Phantom maneuvered through the pitch-black hallways with such lethal confidence. This perspective decodes the terrifyingly comfortable demeanor exhibited on the entryway. It justifies the deployment of the signal jammer. As an individual who has haunted these streets for 20 years, intimately understands the blind spots of every lens. Furthermore, it unravels the lingering enigma of a blue Honda CR-V, mysteriously abandoned inside an automotive repair bay for 40 long days. Mechanics continue to piece the vehicle back together, even as the highest law enforcement official publicly proclaims the relatives are entirely free of suspicion. Hypotheses pointing to external threats, such as random senior exploitation or a botched robbery, manage to justify scattered fragments of the puzzle. Yet they ultimately fail to synthesize the entire horrifying picture. A random maintenance worker would never strike a security lens twice with such deliberate, practiced rhythm. Similarly, a common street crook lacks the discipline to mount a meticulous 3-week rehearsal. An uninvited intruder prowling the grounds could not possibly possess the insider knowledge that the digital surveillance cloud account had quietly lapsed. Most damning of all, no external predator could ever fathom that her vital evening dosage was required precisely at 10 at night, nor would they realize that skipping it triggered a fatal, irreversible biological timer. Then we must confront the mechanics of the official inquiry itself. If the pursuit of justice has moved at an agonizing crawl toward an arrest, the deeply flawed preservation of the actual forensics shares a massive portion of the blame. In a baffling tactical decision, the crime tape was pulled, and the compromised environment was handed back over in less than 20 hours. Once the perimeter collapsed, a maintenance crew with absolutely zero history at that specific residence was inexplicably ushered directly into the rear garden by a uniformed officer. A groundskeeper casually hauled equipment across the contaminated soil. Fast food arrived at the doorstep, while a medical caregiver simultaneously wandered through the compromised space. Journalists were permitted to stroll right up to the entryway, freely snapping images of the rust-colored stains that remained chillingly visible on the concrete. Seasoned forensic specialist Joe Scott Morgan meticulously chronicled this horrific degradation of evidence, noting the absolute absence of a scene log. He grimly pointed out that the critical biological traces they hope will secure a conviction might just belong to a random water technician. Federal agents were eventually forced to re-infiltrate the premises simply because a crucial optical sensor mounted near the shingles was completely overlooked during the initial search. Authorities had to summon tech giants to digitally resurrect the missing footage. Meanwhile, the delicate physical traces extracted from the interior were shipped off to a commercial testing facility all the way in Florida. Bizarrely, those critical samples were routed away from the elite federal laboratory at Quantico, an institution specifically equipped to fast-track forensic profiles in abduction scenarios. In stark contrast, the county's lead lawman casually informed Network News that generating a genetic profile could drag on for weeks, several months, or perhaps an entire year. The cellular material pulled from a discarded glove, once heralded as the golden ticket to unmasking the phantom, ultimately matched a bewildered food service worker who had absolutely nothing to do with the nightmare. With one lead dead, a single strand of hope remained. Yet, a dizzying contradiction emerged. The local commander swore to the national media that no such garment was ever discovered indoors, while federal investigators adamantly insisted the exact opposite. The department head stood before the cameras, declaring every breathing soul a potential suspect, only to immediately pivot, granting the inner circle blanket immunity, and labeling any whisper of their guilt as fundamentally heartless. He engaged in a media tour across competing networks, spinning a deeply fractured narrative, where the core truths mutated depending on who was holding the microphone. The highly classified aerial surveillance tactic, utilizing airborne frequencies to hunt for the rhythmic electronic pulse of the victim's cardiac device, was carelessly leaked to the public long before the skies had been thoroughly swept. The shadow who orchestrated her vanishing was essentially handed a masterclass via the evening broadcasts, realizing law enforcement possessed the digital keys to pinpoint the mechanical beat of her heart. Unsurprisingly, that faint, life-affirming frequency went totally dark, never to be intercepted again. A fiercely dedicated civilian coalition, boasting over 5,000 successful wasteland extractions, crossed state lines to offer their unparalleled tracking skills, only to be coldly rejected at the border. Lurking beneath this institutional stubbornness is a deeply entrenched, bitter vendetta. Flashback to the year 2015, when federal authorities aggressively probed the local precinct over the scandalous misappropriation of seized civilian assets. The devastating fallout saw a high-ranking deputy formally charged, ultimately ending his own life in the aftermath. In response, the defiant commander seized the airwaves, publicly condemning the federal inquiry as nothing more than political poison. Former Chief Deputy Castigar disclosed to the Daily Mail that Nanos harbors deep contempt for federal agents. Even before Nancy vanished, 98% of his own personnel formally declared no confidence in his command. The dragnet tightens despite superiors, not because of them, Grinding detectives and agents must remain isolated from this dysfunction. They construct a prosecutorial narrative while facing relentless operational friction from their own command. The perimeter shrinks. Operating from the Tucson bureau, a dedicated unit of 4 detectives and 1 sergeant remains completely consumed. The chaotic 400-person surge ended. What remains is chillingly quiet, hyper-focused, and fiercely precise. On Entin's broadcast, Clemente presented a haunting theory. Investigators likely already interviewed the perpetrator early on. Authorities simply lacked leverage to strike. Masterful detective work means grinding details relentlessly until absolute truth shakes loose. Federal authorities publicly admit civilian tips dried up, yet the pipeline of forensic evidence flows uninterrupted. Biological traces extracted indoors still undergo rigorous analysis. Genetic genealogy, the breakthrough unmasking the Golden State Killer after 40 years and linking Brian Kohberger to Idaho within weeks, bypasses pre-existing criminal databases. It demands merely a single distant cousin in a public registry, one fragmented genetic echo, and a single branch pointing toward a hidden name. Dual biological profiles double the opportunity. Though the discarded glove linked to a service worker, the complex genetic cocktail recovered inside lingers. What are the mathematical odds that the phantom-shedding biological markers inside Nancy's sanctuary lacks relatives across global genealogy networks? That narrow window of anonymity slams shut with every new swab submitted globally. Deep within Nancy's router memory, silent probe requests may lie dormant. These invisible pulses act as digital fingerprints of a mobile device hovering nearby on February 1st, signals smartphones broadcast relentlessly. Should the intruder's wireless connection remain active, the victim's hardware might have silently logged the network their phone desperately sought. Such a digital ghost betrays the perpetrator's physical address, unmasks their service provider, or exposes their unique home system name. Federal agents hold those logs. Unlike biological sequencing, this electronic footprint decodes in hours, mapping their invisible presence. Charting which lenses went blind, the precise hour, and the angle betrays the exact origin point of the triggered jamming equipment. Identifying that origin point reduces the suspect's world to inescapable coordinates on a defined street at an unforgivingly precise moment. Telecommunication tower pings were systematically harvested across multiple dates: February 1st, January 23rd, perhaps January 11th. Federal analysts hunt the solitary device ghosting through that sector on multiple occasions. Should that overlapping digital trail tether back to anyone woven into these theories, the mystery collapses. Medical experts reached a grim consensus. Nancy likely perished within 72 hours, stripped of life-saving prescriptions, unmonitored pacemaker surveillance, and auditory devices. At 84, she was dragged from her bed in the dead of night by a predator callously abandoning her vital medication. This hunt transitioned into a recovery mission, a brutal reality her family embraces. Savannah confessed the family surrendered to her passing, yet desperately need to find her. A staggering $1 million cash is offered anonymously. That monumental sum serves a single psychological purpose, shattering the fragile pact of silence, binding the individuals responsible. In a two-man conspiracy, the first to break ranks secures the immunity deal. The straggler bears the crushing weight of prosecution. Survival demands both hold the line, relying on unspoken faith their partner won't fold. Yet, the phantom presence of $1 million twists that supposed loyalty into Arizona's most volatile commodity. The mastermind realizes his foot soldier could destroy him with a single call. The operative knows the mastermind is primed to deny everything. Absolute trust is an illusion. Paranoia reigns supreme. Their historical ties, 19 years of collaborative performances and harmonious melodies, were forged for soundproof studios, not for this. The suffocating reality unfolding at 1:47 in the morning on February 1st is a burden heavier than their souls ever carried. Someone in Tucson knows exactly which of these 5 chilling narratives is absolute truth. Perhaps a watchful neighbor catching a glimpse, an acquaintance overhearing a whispered secret, a peripheral figure spotting a terrifying inconsistency, a slipped tongue during a late-night chat, an inexplicable financial transaction, a sudden shift in demeanor leading up to February 1st. The individual clutching that secret likely watches right now. The 4-hour void between 9:50 at night and 1:47 in the morning is where this mystery breathes. Vital prescriptions abandoned. Carefully removed hearing aids. the surveillance lens inexplicably going blind, the mechanical hum of a descending garage door, observed by a single witness. 14 agonizing hours of dead silence stretched before anyone checked. Only one of the 5 proposed hypotheses connects every macabre puzzle piece. The other 4 are smoke. Meanwhile, tangible proof lies dormant in sterile laboratories, burned into server racks, and frozen inside security lenses. Hermetically sealed within a blue Honda CR-V, a vehicle investigators are reassembling 40 days later. Those stubborn secrets aren't vanishing. The truth lies in wait. For the perpetrator, time is bleeding away, leaving a grim ultimatum: confess now, or let the buried evidence testify instead. Track this investigation, set your alerts, and share your dark deductions below. The fragile silence guarding this horrific secret is about to fracture entirely. When that revelation drops, you will need the psychological context we just unraveled together.